and welcome to the Rajan interview. If Rangarajan and Manmohan Singh have the credit of rewriting the grammar of India's financial sector, perhaps to Raghuram Rajan will go the credit of rewriting the grammar of India's macros. Well, Dr. Rajan, do you think that India's macros have been rewritten? Do you think that 6% to 2% inflation will be a reasonably well-respected range for India's inflation?
Well, I think it's embedded now in both in legislation as well as in government notification for the next 5 years. So I think it is something that all agencies, government, RBI, etc., will try and achieve. So yes, embedded, absolutely.
Okay, well, maybe I got ahead of myself. You know, when you gave your first speech on September 4th, 2013, you started by saying that the Reserve Bank's mandate is to preserve the value of the rupee. But that speech had a lot of goals. What was the one goal you came with at that time which you wanted achieved in your 3 years?
Look, we were, well, okay, so the immediate objective was to stabilize the economy and stabilize not so much the economy itself, which was reasonably stable, but perception of the economy. Remember, we were in the fragile fire at that time, and daily predictions about the rupee were, worse and worse. It's going to get, the rupee was a barometer of what people thought about the economy at that point. And I remember some very respectable analysts saying it's going to hit 100. My son also. The point, I think, is that first stabilize, then create the reforms that were needed to move the financial sector to a different plane. Now, I think both were related, which is why my opening remarks were about here's what we're going to do for the short term, but here's the pathway for the longer term. And I think that struck a chord in people, and then the issue was implementation and execution. Now, I think it came together. Of course, all successes on the policy front depend on a fair amount of luck and a fair amount of events that happen completely outside your control, but that contribute. So I think we have been in a sweet spot as a country, and that has helped. But I also think we have made some changes in the financial sector, institutional changes that will live on.
Okay, but weren't there other goals? Was it only stability of the economy that you
First was stability, but then the second was reforms that build a more resilient market, a more competitive banking system, more access to financing, especially for small and medium enterprises, as well as the poor who have been excluded. And on top of all this, one of the important factors in stability was a resolution process, a process of recovery of debts and putting projects back on track, which was absolutely needed in the short term, but also in the long term for us to be taken seriously as a place to invest. If you're going to invest in large mega projects, you have to have some confidence of return of capital.
Okay. Well, actually, I very clearly remember, and I have your speech with me. You said these are the short-term goals. What did you come with in terms of a term? Did you come prepared for 3 years? Because usually governors have 5 years.
No. I've said again and again that I'm fundamentally an academic. This is my side job. I was 3.5 years at the IMF. I've spent some time at in India, 4 years now. And really, the idea is not to be a career bureaucrat or a career technocrat. It is more where I can implement ideas, where I can implement a reform program, try and do that. And I mean, this was absolutely a job I wanted to have. I think we've worked together as a team in the RBI. We've got a fantastic team, and we've made a great deal of difference.
No, I think, Governor, for the first time, you're not answering my question. It's not like you at all.
Yes.
Did
I come in with 3 years? Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I was intent on doing everything I could.
Because in your first speech, you said this is the short-term agenda. I mean, I even highlighted that line. So you had a longer innings.
No, well, that is your surmise. No, look, I'm not saying that I had in mind full stop at the end of it or whatever. But everything I wanted to do was structured for a 3-year horizon. Now, as we started the bank cleanup, I saw there were some things which would require perhaps at least waiting and watching and being ready to react for a little while longer. Similarly, with the Monetary Policy Committee, maybe a couple of meetings to see it going on would have been useful. That is why when people kept asking me, are you in for a second term? I said, well, there are things to be finished.
No,
but that doesn't mean in any way that, I was, what's the right way of saying this, that I was absolutely hell-bent on having a second term.
No, you just said in your letter to your employees that I would have liked to see these processes complete.
Yes.
So it appeared that you wanted...
I was open for staying a little while longer to see them complete, but at the same time, I was perfectly happy to go.
But weren't you, would you have been open for a 2-year term extension up to 2 more years?
Look, that's a hypothetical question.
It is hypothetical,
yeah,
but there would have been.
I think the main issue is there are some things that remain unfinished, but my sense is 90 to 95% of what I wanted to do, both in that opening statement and that have emerged after that, are done as initiatives where you need to set structures, ideas have to creep in, etc. What is left to be done is to see it through, and that also requires thinking, that also requires changes. But that is also a much longer term issue. And really, this job is never done. You can never say...
let me put it this way.
Yeah.
What could have kept you? I'm telling you that there are a much larger number of people who would rather you stay.
Right.
So, I mean, what could have kept you?
No, look, I think there was a process of dialogue with the government, and dialogue eventually didn't reach a place where we could agree that I would stay on. That's essentially what happened. So, given that, there is no point talking about what could have happened and what would have happened.
Is it that all those vituperative attacks, completely unjustified
absolutely
attacks, changed your mind?
No, look, I've said again and again. First, university gives you a pretty thick skin. There are lots of attacks, not ad hominem attacks. Some of the attacks were ad hominem. That is imputing sort of motives and alleging things completely without any basis. Those I just put aside. I don't even pay any attention to it. But there are obviously in this job there are legitimate criticisms. Are you focusing too much on inflation? And those you can actually address, and those I've tried to address in various speeches, because I really think it's important to convince the public in this country about the way you're going and why you're doing it. Because ultimately only with conviction will there be durability. After all, what we're trying to do, what we need to do, is institutional reform in this country which builds a platform for strong and sustainable growth. I keep saying, it is a no-brainer to generate growth when the rest of the world is growing really strongly. Then you focus on export-led growth, and that doesn't require a huge amount of institutional change. But if you're trying to impel domestic demand, you have to be very careful you don't get into an inflationary spiral, you don't get into a credit spiral which leads to a bust.
I have all those questions.
And therefore, okay, so I'll wait for your sequence.
Okay. No, I'll tell you why. Yeah. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out if, something went wrong in the sense, is it that if you had to play the game again over the last 2 years, would you have played it differently? I mean, it looks like quite a few ministers had angry things to say, or probably wanted to grab headlines by saying those things. Is it that you would have been a more team man, or did something go wrong?
You have to remember the RBI is supposed to be an entity that is conservative, that is longer term in vision, and that focuses on stability. I have been very, very open towards reform, innovation on reform, trying to stir up the reform process. But as far as stability goes, I've been very conservative. Let us call a spade. Let us make sure that we're not getting overly exuberant. Let us provision where we need to provision. Let us recognize where we need to recognize. Because I think both go together.
Do you think that hurt some of the ministers?
I don't want to speak for the ministers. What I will say is, wherever we've had to say no, I've never worried about reappointment or about whether I'll have a future career in the government or anywhere else. I have said no when I think it is in the best interest of the country. I think that way I'm being the best team player I can possibly be. If I go along just for being comfortable, I think we're building risks for the future which will really hurt the country. And I think whatever, if you look in hindsight, whenever we've made a mistake, it's been by being too pliant, rather than doing our job and being the regulator we have to be. So for example, state governments that have been making promises they cannot hold or have been building up debts that they cannot pay, we have been firm and we've told them where they have to. Where programs are initiated which we think are unviable, we've told the relevant ministries.
So were those the factors that were speaking against you?
I'm not going to speculate. I think the bottom line is that there was no consensus, and that's where it stopped.
No, once again, let me tell you where I'm coming from. We did think that we would have a world-class central banker for 5 years. Maybe we will get one, but that's not the point. The point is what we were expecting would last for 5 years or 6 years got cut short into 3 years. So I'm asking, there were a lot of speeches that were quoted against you, quoted out of context, no doubt. So if you had to rethink, would you not have given some of those speeches?
No, but you see, everything comes as a package. When I say there was a need to create the underlying groundswell, think about the debt process that has been initiated in terms of recognition, in terms of recovery. You had to convince the public that that was necessary. Occasionally, that means...
I don't think that was attacked much. Are you trying to say that it was your attack on crony capitalism?
No, I am saying that you have to give speeches to build consensus for what you're doing. And if there are entities who want to take bits and pieces of a speech and play it out any which way you want, you have little control over that.
That's true.
And sometimes it's not motivation, it's just somebody wants to create a headline and they do it, and it gets out of control. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the factors I recognized early in terms of stability was the fact the outside world wasn't growing. So I said, look, this was about 2014, look, outside world is not growing. We have to make in India, which means do all the reforms in India that we need in order to produce more in India. But let us make in India knowing the outside world is slow, therefore we have to make for India. And that means, and the bottom line of the speech was macro stability. Because if we don't have macro stability, we'll have credit booms, inflation booms, etc., which will destroy the make for India also. So that speech was taken the moment I delivered it, which was in front of a very respectable audience, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Vinay Bharatram, people like that. I got into the car, I read it. Rajan criticizes Modi's make in India, and instead substitutes make for India. I mean, where do you make for India other than in India? So my point is that anything you say can be warped, distorted, and I said yesterday, which the speeches were meant to build, but the reports of the speech have taken a life of their own. People quote the reports without ever having read the speech.
I completely take your point. I mean, there is a lot that my tribe has to.
The point I want to make is that I have not been off the reservation. I have tried to push in particular directions which I think are very important for the stability and long-run growth of the country. And the speeches were almost entirely focused on that.
I'm not objecting to the speeches. I'm a great student of many of your speeches, almost all of them. But you're not getting the spirit of my question at all. I'm just trying to check if
I don't think so.
In your quieter moments, in your daffodil moments, do you ever think that, I wish I hadn't said that and got into unwarranted trouble?
No, look, the other point, and I think you've made this to me once before, is that the media is looking for something to focus on. And I think the extent of scrutiny that my interviews, my speeches, my sometimes offhand comments, sometimes comments when reporters aren't supposed to be there. They get so much attention. Now, that means every word matters. But not only, and this was a complaint I made, look, I love the press. I don't want to complain about it. You do a very good job. But not every phrase can stand on its own. You can't take a phrase out and hang it out and say,
I'm not defending the press at all.
No, please defend the press.
I'm only asking you if you would have lived your life differently.
No, look.
If you would have dropped some speeches. Made some friends you didn't make.
At the end of the 50-minute interview, which was supposed to be a podcast at the IMF, on page 10, when they asked me, what about India, aren't you feeling very, gung-ho about India? And my Tamil conservatism comes out, and I say, look, don't praise us too much. The cup is half full, and that gets taken out and sort of becomes a iconic phrase. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't important. It was an offhand comment. If I had to watch every one of the words I say with that amount of scrutiny, I'd never say anything. But the point is, I regret nothing. I am perfectly satisfied. I sleep very well. And would I change anything I did? Well, hindsight, of course, says you would do some things a little differently, not to curry political favor, but because they didn't work as well as advertised.
I wonder whether you sleep well. Some of your emails are at 11:30, 11:59, and some of your mails are at 4 in the morning. But that said, okay, to come back to the issue at hand, 2 years too short for the nation, we would think. What could you have done? What would you say is your unfinished agenda?
So I think there is an agenda of taking a lot of the stuff that has been started to its conclusion. Take on the internal side at the RBI, we have started a performance evaluation scheme as well as a performance support scheme. How do you rate people to get a meaningful rating? In the government and public enterprises, it's very flat. It was flat here also. How do you get people to be rewarded for doing good stuff? And if they do badly, how do you point out their areas of weakness and give them the support to actually improve?
That's underway in RBI?
That's underway. There's a performance management system which has now worked for two cycles. We're trying to get supervisors to stop sort of giving everybody wonderful ratings and be much more objective. There's a little bit of forced ranking in the process. But I think slowly people are seeing that there is value and it is permeating up the hierarchy, and it is also forcing supervisors to have constant discussions with their subordinates rather than...
That is a big unfinished agenda.
That is an example of something that needs to be seen through. We're starting an RBI Academy, which is going to provide some of that teaching support. After all, the world over, central banks are specialized. So how do we build the specialized skills? We're finding our young people, giving them scholarships to go abroad and this thing. I was very glad to see RBI as the number 3 employer according to some survey. But we are attracting a lot of very good, very enthusiastic people. We need to keep their enthusiasm alive. So how do we enable them to specialize? How do we enable them to move faster into areas that they can really contribute to? So this organization is brimming with life. It would be nice to see that through, but it is something that requires sort of building. And I have no doubt that whoever is my successor will find that interesting to do.
Well, I have an unfinished agenda of questions, and I think you also have some unfinished questions. All those coming to Governor Rajan in a minute. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Rajan interview. Governor Rajan, we were speaking about your unfinished business. Actually, I was thinking of a couple of them. One really is the NBFC area. We always thought, or that was the perception and maybe even the reality, that Reserve Bank was a little wary of NBFCs because they are lighter touch in regulation compared to the banks. But lately, we have seen a lot of growth in NBFCs, exponential growth. And the extent of consumption, consumer finance, I mean, we know that investment has not picked up, but consumer finance is galloping at 22%, year after year. For 3 years, then you have actually doubled it. Are you worried that you are behind the curve in regulating?
No. So as far as the NBFCs go, I think we have been light of touch for the very reason that they don't take deposits, and we have sort of been very careful with the deposit-taking NBFCs.
Yes.
Now, what we do want to ensure is the bigger NBFCs are inspected regularly, and that their asset portfolios are seen with the same kind of caution we see banks, noting, however, that because they're financed usually with longer term money, that they have a different capital requirement, that we can be a little more liberal on the risk that they take. Now remember, if we did not allow a little more risk taking, those risks would somehow find their way back to the banks. For example, loans to developers.
Exactly.
This
I was
is-
coming loans to,
yeah.
I mean, loan against property is a worry. I mean, even
No.
in the regulated sector.
No. So what we don't want is the banks to be heavily exposed because of the possibility that they would perhaps incur large losses. Somebody has to finance those loans, and those loans aren't easily financed through the bond markets. So some NBFCs do take up that kind of lending. What we have to make sure is that they have the full incentive to recover on those loans. So thankfully, we don't have.
You're not worried. I mean, there's a
No,
lot
no,
of consumer lending as well.
Of course, we have to be worried about the overall picture and whether any entity is taking excessive risk. So we are monitoring this process, and we do weigh, whether these entities have enough capital, whether the exposures are excessive. And if you recall, we're bringing them under the same regulatory umbrella as the banks in terms of NPA and so on, to make sure that even while these guys are taking more risk, the disclosure is also appropriately careful.
No, I was just worrying, even MFIs, some of them have got small bank licenses. There is an exponential growth even in their finances. So you have the bandwidth. Are you sure there are no red flags there?
I think growth is often a flag.
Exactly.
Let's say an orange flag rather than a red flag. However, remember that one of the factors in the economy today is the public sector bank loan growth is much weaker, and as a result, something else is filling the gap. Now, we have to be very careful that while the public sector banks are dealing with their balance sheet problems, we don't completely shut off credit growth elsewhere. So you have to tolerate, that's why private sector banks are also growing at 20-25%.
Their consumption line is growing.
Yeah, no, the consumption, but even actually, if you look at their small business lending as well as the industrial lending, it's also growing in the high teens or low 20s.
A lot of people think that the SME lending is actually lending against property.
It could be. It could be. And one of the things we are focused on, which now will come up regularly, is the real estate exposure, direct or indirect, of the banks.
You're monitoring it directly.
We are monitoring it. There are some banks that are exposed to a greater degree than others, and we have had a conversation with them about the extent of the exposure. Now, I think all said and done, land is the biggest source of value in an emerging market. So to completely rule out using that as a collateral or that as a basis for lending will basically shut off a lot of lending.
In fact, sometimes it will be a better collateral than perhaps a plant or a factory.
Absolutely.
Okay, actually the other thing to refers repeatedly to banks is not that a major unfinished agenda, the public sector banks. I know government is the owner, but as a regulator, it is 70% of what you regulate.
Right.
The numbers are sometimes scary. I mean, yesterday IOB was 20% NPA. What is the end game or even the next game, or at least the bottom rung?
The first is to stop the leakage, and that means make better loans, which means the appropriate due diligence, which means the appropriate governance. So I think the Bank Board Bureau, a very welcome development, and remember it was on the basis of the Nayak Committee, which suggested this, and the government espoused this and has moved forward quite firmly and fast on this. I think that's a welcome development. I think they are looking partly as in terms of filling those positions, but partly they're thinking through what needs to be done on the governance and the loan recovery side, which I think is very important.
So if you had 2 years, that would be the area you would have concentrated on?
No, I think that's one of the areas. There are so many places where you can constantly sort of make improvements. I mean, one of the nice things of being at the RBI is that we are in a country where there are tremendous numbers of low-hanging fruit. And you know, you feel, I'm mixing metaphors here, but like a kid in a candy store. You want to grab, because there's so much. And I think, you know, one of the problems sometimes is focus. How do you focus on doing the necessary number of things? And a lot of areas have been opened. For example, consumer protection. We've enunciated those 5 rules of consumer protection. We've told the banks to go out and figure out how they want to do it. But there are areas of continuing worry. Let me give you 2. One, you know, mis-selling of, say, insurance. A big area of concern. And it's something where, you know, we've had consumer advocates come to us with mystery shopping exercises that suggest it's going to. We've sent mystery shoppers into banks, and we find that there are issues about full information. So that's an area we're going to take very seriously. Second, you know, just functioning of ATMs. If 30% of the ATMs that you have don't function, what kind of an efficient system are you running?
We are hoping we are going to leapfrog and make ATMs pointless.
Yes, but till that happens, you can't go into this thing and find the ATM not working. Similarly, you know, the ATM frauds, can we find some way to prevent them? So, for example, if you key in your PIN number, if somebody has a phone sitting up there taking photos, they can see it. Well, in Indonesia, they have a simple cover over the when you put yours. So you have to key it in under a cover so only you can see. Well, that's a plastic cover which can be just fixed on. Can we fix it? So, I mean, there are things like this that we need to constantly keep innovating. The point I'm trying to make is, one, yes, there is a need to do this. But second, I remember this famous phrase, the cemetery is full of indispensable people. Okay. So, I mean, somebody else will come and do it. This organization is strong. It has a good second, third line. And one of the interesting things is they do all the work, you get the credit. So it's important that
you are in a giving mood, sir.
No, I think that they will continue. It's got a fantastic ethos.
Okay. Well, I can't let you go without asking you about your the worries you have on the global scenario. You have been perhaps one of the best crystal ball gazers of you know, red flags in the global scenario, especially the 2008 crisis. Now we have this unlimited dollar printing, and now governments joining the bandwagon, and exactly at that time both bonds and equities are at their highest historical prices. How do you look at this thing unraveling?
You know, I worry. I worry because I don't think we understand fully what is going on. On the one hand, this you know, the notion that these very low real interest rates are here because of low growth, low productivity, etc. But why do we have such low productivity? What's really going on? Are we mismeasuring it? Or is it truly really low? And where is all this technology innovation, this healthcare innovation? Where is it getting counted? Where is it getting absorbed? So on the one hand, we are very scared we'll all be replaced by robots. But that means a huge increase in productivity and based on technology. On the other hand, we are saying there's no growth.
So are we worrying about this huge unraveling because we have come out of Lehman, and actually there is no such big apocalypse waiting to happen?
Well, I do think that exit from the current policies is going to be difficult. You have asset prices that are priced for a combination of, on the one hand, Great Depression levels of interest rates, and on the other hand, equities are priced as if, you know, earnings are going to be really strong. Of course, the discount rate is also low, but earnings are also expected to be quite strong. The two again don't fit together. So there's a disconnect in the way things are priced, and the only way you can explain it is we have distortions. and distortions perhaps created by policy. And that's why I do worry.
How about India's, okay, you worry, where might things go wrong?
No, well, at some point, there will be an adjustment. What the trigger will be, it's hard to say. The world's best scenario is this winds down gradually, we come out, growth picks up, etc., etc. That's the benign scenario. The not so benign scenario is there's a trigger, either a trigger to earnings because of some adverse geopolitical development, or a trigger to discount rates because of some adverse inflationary development. And one of those sets the
Sometime
proverbial
back you
cap.
worried it would be China.
Well, that could be a growth development, but China, my sense is there's not going to be because there is a filtering of the news from there and so on. It's not going to be one report which suddenly makes you really, really worried. It could be a policy move, as in January this year or in August last year, but it could also be that in the areas where news is more sort of unmanaged, for example, the US, a strong inflation report could be very problematic.
Well, at the moment it looks a distance away, but how do you think India should prepare for this?
I think we've been doing that for quite some time. I think this is why my sort of emphasis on macro stability. The government, certainly with the fiscal, in the budget, adhering to fiscal norms, the movement on the GST, I think more than just the enactment of GST was the signal it sent that the central parties could come together for important reforms, and that I will support in government and oppose outside, that seems to have broken. I think this is great news for the country. And if this can extend to other important pieces of legislation, I think it bodes very well for our future.
Okay. Well, just last two questions. One of the things that you have set in motion is the payment bank, the payment interface, unified payment interface. If you were to return in some position
as a ghost?
2 years from now, oh no, as a second term in the RBI or in any other fashion, I mean, basically I wanted to ask you, how do you think the financial system will look? Do you think the path is set for way more financial inclusion? What is all this UPI?
I would hope so.
What is UPI, payment bank? What is the end game or the next game?
The end game is to reduce the cost of transactions and to therefore, by reducing the cost of transaction, reach every Indian, no matter how poor. Now, I mean, look, somebody is sitting on a hilltop, and there are many of villages in 10 miles above the bigger town, no access to ATMs. They want to pay in the Kirana shop. They have access to cell phones because cell phone towers are ubiquitous now. Can they use a transfer mechanism which doesn't require them going down and getting cash and bringing it out? And this is where UPI, for example, comes in. So I think for us, leapfrogging the cash economy is very important. Now, of course, you hit against some behavioral issues also. Some people don't like to get into the formal economy because they may be recognized by the taxman. Well, so can we address that issue and give them incentives as well as pull back the tax, the sense of tax harassment? And I think we're working on all these issues. So I'm hopeful that we'll leapfrog.
I'm being warned about time. So actually the final question. Even the public sector banks, now if you were to return 2 years from now, how much do you think the public sector banks will have as a share? Do you see that share being much lower?
Look,
because you have given so many licenses.
I do think there will be differentiation amongst the public sector banks, and as that differentiation emerges, you will have some very good, very strong winners who have made the changes to adapt to the new opportunities. Remember, public sector banks still have a lot of name recognition, a lot of goodwill,
And a lot of very good bankers, I must
a
say.
lot of good bankers and a lot of respect amongst the public. So the ones that can capitalize on that and take advantage of the new technologies, reduce their cost structure, my sense is those will grow very strongly. The others will have to take some decisions. Do they become niche banks? Do they become, and some of them are moving in that direction.
So they would be 50% of the
Or do they
industry.
merge? Do they merge? Well, at current growth rates, obviously their share is shrinking. What the eventual share is, I think, is anybody's guess.
Okay. Well, Governor, it was a pleasure having you for 3 years. In what avatar will you return?
Look, what my focus is on right now is getting back into research, which is my first love. And then obviously I want to see the economic sort of thinking in India strengthened, and my sort of immediate aim is to see what I can do on the research and teaching side to get more students into the area, to get them to think more and to do more research on India.
Well, I just wanted one reassurance or one probably analysis from you. Was it crony capitalists who got you? Because you went after them like no governor has gone or no governor maybe needed to go. Is that, if that is the case, then we have something to worry.
No, look, I don't think you should attribute this to some hidden hand or something. I feel I've done what was needed to be done. If they had such power, they would have stopped me in what was needed. I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that what I wanted to do, I've had absolute freedom in doing. Obviously, this required a lot of work behind the scenes with government, persuading government. So when people say you've been fighting all the time, absolutely not. Great relationships both with the previous government as well as people who matter in this government.
So you part as friends?
Absolutely. So I don't think that is the issue. I think the issue was these things needed to be done. And obviously there are constituencies that get riled. And if there are enough constituencies that get riled, maybe they form a broader coalition. But I don't think there's any, point a finger at X and say X is the hidden hand.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that of 1.3 billion people and an overwhelming majority will want you back, and we do hope you will come back in some avatar for probably rewriting India's macros, making us that much closer to becoming a middle income country. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you very much, Governor Rajan, for all that you have done.
Thank you.
See you, sir.